Welcome back to the deep dive. This is the place where we take these just huge stacks of complicated information intelligence reports, geopolitical analysis, and we try to deliver the crucial insights you really need to be ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
And today we are talking about what can only be described as a geopolitical earthquake. It happened, well, seemingly overnight.
Yeah.
The surgical extraction of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro by U.S. commandos.
It was a shockwave. I mean, it was felt instantly, from Caracas all the way to Beijing.
Yeah.
And for you, our listener, the mission today is to really get the context of this single, precise action.
Right.
We're going to be dissecting the analysis from Tenenbaum and other observers to really grasp the massive, complex ripple effects this is having, not just in Latin America, but across the globe.
It was a lightning strike.
Absolutely. Designed for precision.
Yep.
The idea was to maximize the impact while, and this is key, maintaining control over the chaos that was bound to follow.
And that element of surprise was just absolutely central to how it was executed. We've seen this before, right? It's a signature Trump administration tactic.
Striking on a Saturday.
Exactly. The massive retaliatory strike on Iran, that was a Saturday. And here we are again, Saturday night, grabbing the Venezuelan president. It just catches the media, the markets, and maybe most importantly, competitors like China and Russia completely off guard.
It says so much about the strategy, which is destabilization through surprise. And as we start to dig in, the first question is the most critical one.
Why now?
Why now? Why such a, minimal effort operation? And by that, I mean not an invasion. And why just Maduro and his wife?
Okay, so the answer has to be in the method itself.
It is. And as Tenenbaum really stressed, this was fundamentally not an invasion. And that distinction is everything.
What's the difference in this context?
An invasion implies a total, costly regime change. Brute force. It means years of occupation. This was something else. This was a highly focused display of power, an intelligence op designed to decapitate the snake while keeping the regime intact enough to prevent total chaos.
So controlled demolition.
A surgical removal followed by a controlled transition.
So this isn't a war, it's a hostage situation, but on a national scale. It creates this huge, immediate leverage.
That's it.
Let's dive into that.
Okay.
Let's really unpack this. It's a calculated move. So if the goal wasn't a full-on regime change like we saw in Iraq or Afghanistan, those long, bloody operations, what was the primary short-term objective here? Why take such an incredible risk for such a, minimal target?
The immediate goal, the one that overrides everything else, was to demonstrate immense, almost unbelievable power and capability. But, and this is the key, with the absolute minimum effort necessary. The whole point was to avoid giving anyone, like Russia or Cuba, a justification for a regional conflict.
So it's not about troop superiority, it's about intelligence superiority.
Exactly. It's about knowing exactly where he was, who was with him, how to get in, and how to get out. It's a pure application of psychological force.
It sounds like the ultimate psychological warfare, but, executed with military precision. The message it sends to U.S. adversaries is just terrifying.
It is.
If we can take Maduro, we can take anyone.
That's it. Precisely. And the analogy that keeps coming up in these high-level circles is Israel's intelligence actions.
Like the Iranian nuclear archive.
Exactly like that famous retrieval years ago. These ops are designed to leave the enemy just stunned, exposed, and utterly paranoid about American reach. When you could just walk into a sovereign, heavily guarded country, grab its dictator, and leave everything else standing, you fundamentally change the security calculus for every other hostile state.
Tehran, Havana, Moscow.
All of them. The cost-benefit analysis for continuing to operate outside international norms, it suddenly looks very, very expensive.
And there's a fascinating, almost chilling detail inside the operation itself that points right to this.
The bodyguards.
The 32 Cuban bodyguards. The operation specifically liquidated them. This wasn't just about neutralizing an obstacle. This was a targeted removal of a very specific foreign influence.
Right at the point of contact. And that detail is the smoking gun that confirms the nature of the regime. It really forces us to discuss this hypothesis, this specific one that analysts have raised.
Which is?
That those guards were not just there to protect Maduro from the U.S. The real question is, were they there to make sure he didn't defect?
To stop him from making a separate deal.
Or to stop him from revealing what he knew? To protect the entire Cuban-Venezuelan power axis by guarding the knowledge inside Maduro's head.
So they were jailers, not just guards.
Precisely. They were the security apparatus for the information itself. The fact that they were eliminated suggests they weren't seen as bodyguards to be overcome, but as high-level political liabilities. The removal was essential to secure the most valuable asset.
Maduro's testimony.
Exactly, the intelligence pipeline.
And this is where the psychological part really kicks in. A successful, clean extraction just immediately fuels this global paranoia.
Oh, absolutely.
Cuba is facing an existential crisis. China, Russia, all of Venezuela's allies must be asking themselves right now, what secrets did Maduro have about our dealings?
And what will he reveal now that he's in U.S. custody? Taking him from his own country and putting him into the U.S. justice system creates this perpetual lever of influence. It weaponizes uncertainty.
Right.
Every regime, every corrupt official, every political group that ever dealt with Venezuela's, opaque finances or drug trafficking, they are all engaged in a feverish internal audit right now.
Wondering, is my name on the list he's about to hand over?
Minute by minute. And that uncertainty is almost more powerful than the actual revelation because it changes behavior before anything even happens.
Let's talk about the man himself then. Nicolas Maduro. He's now facing U.S. justice, a potential 50-year federal sentence for what? Drug trafficking, corruption? U.S. federal prisons are a terrible place for a former head of state. So what kind of future is he looking at? And how does he fight that?
Well, his future depends entirely on his willingness to cooperate.
And the value of that cooperation.
Exactly. And the context here strongly suggests we are not looking at a simple defense case. This isn't going to be resolved in a normal courtroom. The immediate sign of that is his choice of lawyer.
Barry Polak.
Barry Polak. This is not your conventional defense lawyer who's going to argue plea bargains or technicalities. Polak is known for making major governmental arrangements.
He's a deal maker. Can you elaborate on why that's so significant for the listener?
Of course. I mean, Polak is the guy who brokered the high-stakes deal that eventually stopped the U.S. pursuit of Julian Assange.
Right.
And Assange, just like Maduro, had secrets that crossed multiple jurisdictions, involved global political interest. Polak understands how to negotiate information for clemency.
Or for protection.
Or for protection. The analysis from Tenenbaum here is that hiring Polak signals the start of high-level negotiations. This is being managed by the Department of Justice and the State Department. This is not a standard courtroom defense.
So Maduro isn't hiring someone to say, my client is innocent. He's hiring someone to orchestrate a geopolitical trade.
That's it. How much is my client's information worth to you, and what is the cost of my silence?
That's a huge question.
It is. And Maduro walks into that negotiation with two key negotiating cards.
Yeah.
And they have dramatically different values.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the nuclear option. This is insider, verifiable knowledge on countless powerful figures, criminal organizations, nations. This is the highest value card. It's pure political currency.
He knows where all the bodies are buried.
The secret dealings, the specific corruption links, the illicit operations that connect Caracas to Moscow, to Tehran, to Havana, to Brasilia. He knows it all.
And what's the second card?
The second card, the financial one, is lower value, but still significant, revealing the location of billions in hidden funds.
Held by him and his cronies.
Exactly. And this money is important to the U.S. for asset recovery, but it doesn't destabilize governments. It just gets some money back. The political information, though, that has the power to reshape continents.
That distinction is so important. We're talking about trading political careers and state secrets for the life and safety of one man.
And that leads to the core implication of his silence. Maduro isn't seen as a martyr by anyone, not even his allies. He's a criminal who got caught.
Right.
The prognosis laid out in the source material is clear. If he stays silent, he gets 50 years in jail. But if he talks, he could save himself, get a reduced sentence, maybe protect his family.
But in doing so, he destroys political careers and destabilizes regimes all over the world.
The pressure on him is immense. And the U.S. now controls the tap for that information flow. That is the leverage.
So the U.S. has created this massive geopolitical lever in D.C. by capturing Maduro, but that leverage is useless if Caracas just collapses into warlordism.
Right.
So let's talk about phase 2, controlled stabilization. The U.S. didn't install an opposition figure. Instead, they backed Delcy Rodriguez, a major figure from within the Chavista regime. I have to ask, why pass over established opposition leaders like Maria Corina Machado or Edmundo? Wouldn't that have been politically easier?
This takes us right to the ruthless, pragmatic lessons the U.S. has learned from past interventions. It's a cold, hard political calculus.
Okay.
Why pass over the opposition? Well, according to internal assessments and the analysis that Tenenbaum shared, the traditional opposition figures, they were popular, but they lacked crucial operational knowledge,
Operational knowledge of Venezuela's systems of power.
specifically how they are greased.
Okay, we need to pause on that term greased. It sounds like jargon, but it means something very specific here.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
When we talk about how a corrupt system is greased, we're not talking about standard policy or budgets. We're talking about the specific, illicit, bureaucratic choke points, the financial pipelines, the mechanisms of intimidation and payment that keep a criminal regime running.
The logistics of corruption.
The logistics of corruption. Machado, for instance, she was seen as an outsider. She could talk passionately about democracy, but she couldn't manage the logistics of paying off a key military unit or controlling the Secret Service or maintaining the drug routes that fund the state.
And there's more to it than that.
There is. Machado is a socialist. And the U.S. was never going to install a socialist president to run the most significant oil reserves in the hemisphere.
And what about Edmundo?
Edmundo was described as simply lacking the character, the gravitas, and the operational capability to manage a country in such a deep crisis. You just can't gamble on those qualities when regional stability and oil flow are at stake.
This sounds so eerily similar to the massive failure in post-Saddam Iraq. I mean, bringing back exiles who had no idea how the country actually worked after decades away.
It should remind you exactly of that. The catastrophic precedent of post-Saddam Iraq, bringing back an exile like Ahmed Chalabi, who had been out of the system for decades, he failed utterly.
Because he didn't understand the country's current workings.
Or the military's grievances, or how to manage the infrastructure. That historical failure, where bringing in an outsider led directly to huge security vacuums and the rise of insurgencies, that was undoubtedly the central guiding principle here.
So they decided to exclude the exiles.
They needed a manager, someone who knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively, and who could keep the machine from completely seizing up the moment Maduro was gone.
So Delcy Rodriguez was the choice, a deep insider. We hear she wasn't the only option at first.
That's right. There were negotiations with 3 different groups about who would hand over Maduro and take the reins.
So why was she the pragmatic winner?
She just represented the best combination of control, internal legitimacy, and pragmatism. In the international arena, she often played the good cop in the regime's notorious good cop, bad cop dynamic.
Like Massera and Videla in the Argentine dictatorship.
It's a disturbing parallel, but yes. She appears less overtly threatening than some of the hardline military leaders, which helps manage the international perception and makes the transition look more palatable.
But her real advantage wasn't optics, it was operational.
Absolutely not. Her critical advantage, the real source of her power, is that she controlled the 7.
The internal secret service. The Venezuelan KGB or Stasi, basically.
Exactly. And in a country that's run less by a government and more by a network of criminal operations, controlling the internal intelligence and security apparatus is the ultimate source of power. It's the only entity that monitors and manages all the sub-criminal groups operating across the country.
So Delcy is the one person who has the map of the chaos.
She is. And that control is essential for the U.S. plan, because the #1 priority for the U.S. is preventing chaos.
Right.
Venezuela is atomized. It's broken up into dozens, maybe hundreds, of small, heavily armed criminal and political bands. If you remove the head of state, and there's no strong internal service like the 7 to maintain order, you get immediate fragmentation, warlordism.
A failed state, like Libya or Afghanistan.
Exactly. And that chaos is detrimental to everything, especially oil infrastructure, which we'll get to. Delcy's control of 7 provides the necessary stability to transition the country toward the U.S.'s long-term goals.
So this transition leads us right to Diosdado Cabello. He's always been seen as one of the most powerful figures in the regime, maybe even more powerful than Maduro in some circles. How has the extraction affected his standing, especially since the military did absolutely nothing to stop it?
Cabello's prestige was severely and I think permanently damaged. In a system that's built on displays of uncompromising strength, the image of the president being taken right out from under the military's nose.
With the armed forces just standing by.
It's a mortal wound. It proves that the military's protection is an illusion. Internally, he's seen as weak and, more importantly, ineffective at the moment of truth.
So if figures like Cabello are losing face, what's the core motivation of the remaining regime figures now? Maduro's gone, their protection is proven to be a mirage.
Their motivation is incredibly simple and intensely personal. Survival. You have to remember, these aren't just politicians.
They're all complicit.
Deeply in a vast global criminal operation. This is a textbook narco state. Drug trafficking, illicit gold mining, massive money laundering. Their goal isn't more wealth anymore. Their goal is to avoid prison.
Or worse.
Or worse. The source material notes that for figures like these in Latin America, prison is often the best-case scenario. They will cling to power desperately to avoid extradition to the U.S. or incarceration at home.
So their shared criminal complicity is the new glue holding the regime together.
It's the only glue left. The power struggles are definitely dangerous. Cabello hasn't given up his ambition. But there's a powerful mutual interest in saving themselves together rather than destroying each other in a panic.
The external threat is stronger than the internal rivalry.
The external threat of U.S. justice, the existential fear of extradition and exposure, that's a far more powerful binding agent than any loyalty to an ideology or even to each other.
Yeah.
They have to cooperate to survive.
We've established that Maduro's potential testimony is the ultimate geopolitical leverage. It's a dial the U.S. can turn. How exactly are they planning to use this information? Are they just going to drop a 500-page affidavit tomorrow?
Absolutely not. Releasing everything at once would be amateur hour. The potential testimony of Maduro is the biggest factor governing this entire transition process, not just in Venezuela, but regionally and globally.
So what's the plan?
Tenenbaum details how the U.S. will likely dosage the information.
Dosage it.
Release it slowly, strategically, and only as needed to exert maximum political pressure on various governments, whether they're friend or foe. It's about using the information as a perpetual threat, a precise tool for compliance, forcing foreign policy alignment without ever firing a shot.
This is a geopolitical weapon designed for sustained coercion. Let's look at the grand prize this information could unlock: Brazil. We've heard the stunning claim that if Maduro speaks and the U.S. releases the information, Brazilian President Lula would have to resign within 15 minutes. That's a breathtakingly fast political collapse. Why is Lula so vulnerable? And why is Brazil such a grand prize for Washington?
Well, Brazil is by far the largest and most influential nation in South America. Vast economic potential, significant military. Politically capturing Brazil, meaning ensuring its alignment with U.S. interests, is the grand prize because it fundamentally shifts the regional power dynamic.
It isolates the remaining leftist regimes.
It does that, but more critically, it disrupts global alliances. Lula is a key, highly visible player in the BRICS grouping.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
An alliance dedicated to challenging U.S. global financial and geopolitical hegemony.
So if Maduro reveals financial or corruption links that are documented and undeniable, Lula's administration collapses, and with it, the cohesion of the BRICS alliance is shattered.
That's the strategic goal. If Lula is forced out over corruption exposed by Maduro, the new Brazilian government would almost certainly pivot toward Washington. It shatters the momentum BRICS has been building. It's a massive strategic victory achieved purely through internal political pressure.
And the implications go beyond Brazil, right into Argentina, affecting the entire Kirchner circle.
Yes, the political contamination is regional. Tenenbaum highlights the existential political and financial danger to, and I'm quoting, all the surrounding Kirchner environment. Anyone who did business with Venezuela during that populist wave.
So revelations about illicit financial flows, energy contracts, corrupt deals
could instantly end careers and dismantle the entire political structure that still holds sway in parts of Argentina. It creates a cascading political disaster for the Latin American left, financed by a former ally.
And then there's Petro in Colombia, another regional leader whose position is now precarious because of past alliances.
Petro is highly vulnerable. Colombia has always been intimately intertwined with the narco-politics of Venezuela. Maduro possesses detailed operational knowledge about the inner workings of regional criminal networks, drug routes, money laundering,
which could involve key figures in Petro's circle.
Or even his administration. The moment that information is released, it would immediately threaten Petro's government, even if he tries to weather the domestic political storm.
Speaking of illicit finances, the scale of the money here is just massive. We heard initial reports of $10 billion found in Swiss banks held by proxies.
That's right. Specifically in places like Credit Suisse and Julius Baer. And $10 billion is an astronomical sum. But the consensus among investigators is that this is just the low-hanging fruit.
The easily accessible money.
Held by proxies, not in Maduro's name. The real interest, the bulk of the wealth, the massive geopolitical nest egg, is still hidden.
So where is the ultimate protected hiding spot, according to the logic investigators are following?
The logic, as outlined by Tenenbaum and others reviewing financial intelligence, it suggests the bulk of the wealth is likely in Qatar.
Qatar. Why there?
We have to understand why Qatar is the prime candidate. It's a country that specializes, frankly, in turbid business, a polite term for high-stakes, opaque financial transactions. Qatar is known for working with groups others won't touch, including organizations sanctioned by the U.S., like specific funding channels for Hamas.
Yeah, they have extremely strong banking secrecy.
Incredibly strong. It's very difficult for Western nations to penetrate through normal legal channels.
So the financial card Maduro holds is a direct threat not just to Latin American regimes, but potentially to a major U.S. partner in the Middle East.
Absolutely. If Maduro reveals the precise locations, the account numbers, the specific mechanisms used to hide that wealth in Qatari banks, Qatar faces very, very serious problems. It would expose their systemic complicity in international money laundering, triggering massive sanctions and scrutiny that could cripple their financial sector.
So this is about more than just regime change.
It's a multi-pronged attack on global financial secrecy and the networks that sustain rogue states.
The default assumption with any U.S. intervention is that it's always about oil. But you've argued that, in the short term at least, the oil factor is overhyped. Let's look at the longer, more strategic play. Specifically, the 3 stages of intervention articulated by Trump and Senator Rubio.
These 3 phases are crucial. They signal long-term commitment and strategic patience. This isn't a rushed intervention. It mirrors the Argentine dictatorship's national process model, which was designed to plan systematically, not just execute quickly.
And the 3 stages are?
Phase 1, destabilization, which is what we just saw with the extraction. That can last years. Phase 2 is growth, the rebuilding and normalization. And phase 3 is the political transition leading to a democratic outcome.
So given that timeline, what is the single most important immediate goal of that first phase, the thing that Delcy Rodriguez absolutely has to execute?
The immediate priority, the non-negotiable step, is the expulsion of foreign malign influence.
This is the acid test for her collaboration.
It is. This means ejecting the Cubans, the Russian military and intelligence assets, the Chinese influence, and most critically, the Iranian and Hezbollah elements that have used Venezuela as a base of operations in the Western Hemisphere.
That sounds like an extremely delicate, hurried cleanup.
It's a fire sale. Analysts speculate that Russian and Chinese embassies were likely already burning documents right after the extraction, fearing what Maduro might reveal and the pressure that would follow. This expulsion is critical. It dismantles the alliances that sustain the regime and transforms Venezuela from a base for U.S. adversaries into a neutral or eventually friendly nation. That's step 1 before any major oil discussions.
Let's definitively address the oil infrastructure argument then. If this wasn't an immediate oil grab, what is the cold, hard reality of Venezuela's current petroleum infrastructure? I mean, they have the world's largest reserves.
The reality is catastrophic. While Venezuela sits on the largest reserves, years of gross mismanagement, unchecked corruption, and sanctions mean it only exports about 1% of the world's oil.
1%?
And the infrastructure itself, the pipelines, the refineries, the drilling platforms, is, to use the Spanish term, a pelota.
A pelota. What does that mean in this context?
It literally means a ball. But colloquially in Latin America, it's used to describe a complete chaotic mess, a tangle of broken pieces and systemic dysfunction. The infrastructure is rusted, unmaintained, looted, and functionally inoperable at scale.
So no one invested in maintenance.
They just skimmed the profits. So even if the U.S. wanted to turn the spigot on tomorrow, they couldn't possibly.
Absolutely not.
Full recovery of that sector is a massive, multi-decade undertaking. It needs between $50 and $100 billion in investment and, crucially, an estimated recovery time of 12 years just to get back to mid-level production.
Or perspective.
The recovery in post-Saddam Iraq took 2 decades. Libya still struggles to maintain stable production. Oil cannot be the immediate driver of this action. It's the long-term strategic prize, not the immediate political motivation.
And there's a quality issue. Venezuelan crude isn't the easy, sweet crude that's simple to pump and sell.
That's a key technical detail that's often missed. Venezuelan crude is heavy. It's highly viscous, notoriously difficult to refine. It requires these massive, energy-intensive, complex refineries, like the ones on the Gulf Coast, to process it into useful products like gasoline.
Which makes it inherently less valuable.
And harder to manage than lighter crudes. It just weakens the argument for any kind of short-term profit motive.
So if the immediate goal isn't profit, the primary strategic goal has to be about leveraging the supply disruption against U.S. competitors. How is this being used to target China?
The goal is clear. Use Venezuelan oil as a weapon against Beijing. The U.S. demand that Venezuela sell oil only to the U.S. or to U.S.-approved entities is a deliberate message to China.
Right.
For years, China bought 75 to 80% of Venezuelan oil, often illegally, at bargain basement prices. They were sustaining their energy needs outside of U.S. geopolitical control.
So by restricting that cheap supply, China now faces an oil deficit.
Exactly. It forced them to pay higher prices on the open market or increase dependence on far more expensive and geopolitically complicated sources. It's a deliberate economic squeeze.
And this leads us to one of the most curious footnotes in this whole story, the mystery tanker. It really highlights the complexity of the global black oil market China was dominating.
It does. A highly curious incident. A tanker was seized, supposedly carrying oil between two major U.S.-sanctioned oil producers, Iran and Venezuela. As Tenenbaum noted, why would two oil producers be sending crude to each other?
It makes no logical sense. It's like Argentina sending beef to Texas.
The cover story was immediately suspicious. Intelligence suggested the tanker was actually transporting highly sensitive documents relating to deep Russian and Venezuelan illicit relations arms deals, intelligence sharing maybe. It suggests there are still unseen, curious aspects to this whole story that run deeper than just oil or money smuggling.
It points to the shadow economy the U.S. is trying to unravel through Maduro.
Exactly. And the extraction also serves as a massive financial tool to pressure Russia directly, using the oil market as the lever.
How does that connect to Ukraine?
That is the ultimate strategic goal. Trump's stated objective of lowering the global oil price to, say, $50 a barrel is a direct targeted strategy to financially squeeze Russia.
Their ability to fund the war depends on oil revenue.
Heavily. So by driving up the supply of non-sanctioned oil and pushing down the global price of crude, and therefore the price of sanctioned black market oil, this Venezuelan move creates a pincer movement on Russia's primary income source.
It destabilizes Putin's financing structure.
Through purely financial, not military, pressure, potentially choking off their ability to sustain the war.
The dominoes are just falling so fast across the region. Cuba has been particularly hard hit by the end of subsidized Venezuelan oil.
Cuba is pushed to the edge of an abysmo, a true abyss. Losing Venezuelan oil, which had been propping up their centralized economy for years, creates a profound, immediate crisis that is entirely manufactured by this one extraction.
And you can't talk about this without mentioning the political influence of Senator Marco Rubio.
Impossible. His parents were Cuban exiles. His political motivation to see the Cuban regime collapse without direct U.S. military intervention is well documented.
So personal scores absolutely can influence high-level strategic foreign policy.
They absolutely can, as was pointed out by Tenenbaum, even if the primary strategic objective remains geopolitical dominance. The collapse of Cuba without an external U.S. intervention is a goal long sought by those exiled communities, and this action delivered it via economic strangulation.
What about Colombia and Gustavo Petro? The rhetoric between his leftist government and the U.S. was heated until pretty recently.
Well, Trump is using the classic counterinsurgency approach there, a carrot-and-stick strategy, or alternating seduction or palate charm or a club.
Right.
Petro is already politically weakened. He saw disastrous municipal election results. He's expected to lose the upcoming presidential elections anyway, so the U.S. engagement is less about a long-term alliance and more about short-term cosmetic appeasement.
So Trump can afford to be the nice guy.
He can. He offers a White House invitation to Petro, gets a minor diplomatic victory, knowing that Petro's replacement will likely be far more amenable to U.S. interests.
And then there's Mexico. The fentanyl crisis is raging. The border is a huge domestic political issue.
The cartel problem, the fentanyl epidemic, they remain severe. And the U.S. is actively applying the threat of unilateral intervention if the Mexican president can't demonstrate control over the cartels.
We've seen them act on that threat.
The recent capture of El Mayo Zambada via a DEA sting, it was an operation strikingly similar in its targeted unilateral method to the Maduro extraction. It shows the U.S. willingness to use high-risk, targeted actions on foreign soil to solve domestic problems.
It's a clear warning shot to Mexico's leadership. Fix your border or we'll fix it for you.
That's the message.
Let's bring this back home to Washington. This whole Venezuelan issue seems like a massive, undeniable political gift to Marco Rubio.
It's the political gift that keeps on giving. The extraction handed him immense, undeniable stature. He's now handling multiple high-level roles. He's acting as a quasi-secretary of state for the transition, managing the Internal Security Council, and he's the public point man for the entire Venezuelan operation.
That's an enormous boost to his internal political capital.
Especially with the Republican base, who crave these displays of decisive strength against dictatorships.
And this just directly intensifies the internal Republican competition among potential presidential successors. You're talking Vance versus Rubio versus Cruz, all vying for that foreign policy hawk mantle.
That's exactly where domestic politics intersects with this foreign success. Vance, who had been a rising star, took a significant hit after associating with Nick Fuentes,
An open Nazi and xenophobe.
which forced Vance to pivot hard and fast to the immigration and police agenda to regain media presence and distance himself. Ted Cruz, meanwhile, has already announced his presidential run 3 years out.
So the Venezuelan success elevates Rubio.
It elevates him into the strongest position among the three. It casts him as the decisive, effective foreign policy hawk, a critical advantage when you're campaigning against the isolationist wing of the party.
So foreign policy success can translate directly into domestic political currency. It takes an abstract international issue and makes it a concrete national victory.
It absolutely does, especially when you bring the subject Maduro to U.S. soil. It reframes the entire issue for the American public, who generally care more about local things like inflation and gas prices. It's a way for the administration to project strength globally while focusing attention at home.
While Latin America is absorbing this shock, the focus also shifts to Iran, where the regime is facing serious, sustained internal uprisings. What's the analysis of the path forward there?
Iran is trying desperately to maintain control. After the Venezuelan extraction, the Iranian regime tried to use the events to declare war, or at least the threat of war, on Europe, Israel, and the U.S.,
Hoping it would invoke nationalist unity.
and quash the domestic uprisings. But the U.S. and Israel publicly and immediately refuted any intention of attacking Iran. They disarmed the regime's main argument and show that the element of surprise, once exposed, can be countered.
So if the regime can't rally the people, will the people bring down the regime?
I'm alone. Not according to the analysis. Tenenbaum details that the people alone will likely not succeed because of the overwhelming power of the Revolutionary Guards. The only viable path to regime change in Iran is a military coup.
Specifically by the main professional army.
Right, not the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has been severely damaged internally. Such a coup would be highly violent, especially in religious centers like Qom, and complicated by regional traditions of familial vengeance among the factions. The timing is an open question, but the military is the only entity capable of ensuring order after a regime change.
And finally, Russia and the war in Ukraine. How does the Venezuelan situation impact the deadlock there?
Russia is continuing its calculated aggression. They're targeting civilian infrastructure in the winter to demoralize the Ukrainian populace through cold and deprivation. But there is a critical dynamic here regarding the political end of the war that's highlighted in the sources.
Okay.
Russia cannot agree to any peace deal where Trump acts as the mediator.
That seems counterintuitive, given the historical relationship. Why would Russia refuse a mediator who is generally perceived as favorable to them?
Because accepting a peace deal brokered by the U.S. president would fundamentally undermine Putin's self-portrayal as a geopolitical equal to the U.S. It implies subservience and weakness to the Russian people and to his inner circle.
So the war continues.
Therefore, until the circumstances change drastically, or until a different, less equal to the U.S. mediator is found, the war will continue for some time, which requires the U.S. to keep applying that financial pressure, like the oil strategy we discussed.
Okay, let's try to bring this all together.
To synthesize what we've discussed, the Venezuelan extraction was less about the immediate oil profit, which is a 12-year infrastructure project, and far more about a calculated geopolitical move. It was designed to destabilize key strategic opponents, China, Russia, and Iran, and to apply perpetual non-military pressure on regional allies like Brazil and Argentina. The sophistication of this operation lies in its minimalism and its creation of massive, sustained leverage.
The essential insight from Tenenbaum that really runs through this entire complex story is that the immediate fate of the entire Latin American left hinges entirely on what one man, Nicolas Maduro, chooses to say while sitting in a U.S. jail cell. His potential testimony holds the power to reshape the political landscape of an entire continent. The U.S. now owns that leverage, and they're using it masterfully.
And that silent potential testimony is precisely what makes this extraction so historically transformative.
We've spent a lot of time discussing how Maduro's potential testimony impacts Lula and the Kirchner Circle. But here's the final provocative thought, and it comes straight from the analysis. What if the U.S. chooses never to release Maduro's most damning secrets? Does the knowledge that the information exists, the palpable threat of its release at any moment, grant the U.S. even greater perpetual leverage over Brazil and Argentina? Could Washington effectively govern the region through political threat rather than intervention, using a simple prisoner as a geopolitical mute button? That is the long game of surprise tactics that you should continue to think about. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.